Two soldiers stand at identical crossroads during wartime. Both receive the same order. Both have the same training, the same fears, the same moral reservations. One obeys, one refuses. 50 years later, one is remembered as a hero who resisted evil. The other is condemned as a war criminal. Here's what makes this unbearable. The only difference between them was a piece of information neither could have known at the time. One happened to serve under a regime that lost. The other happened to serve under a regime that won. Same character, same choice, opposite moral verdicts. What if I told you that the moral difference between a good person and a bad person might come down to nothing more than luck? By the end of this episode, you'll understand why philosopher Thomas Nagel believed that the deepest principle of our moral thinking, that we are only responsible for what we control, might be completely incoherent, and why that matters more than almost any other philosophical problem you have never heard of. I used to think moral judgment was simple. You evaluate someone's character by looking at their choices. If they choose well, they are good. If they choose badly, they are bad. The outcome doesn't matter, only the intention. It's clean, it's fair, it's wrong. The reason this question matters today is because we are constantly making moral judgments about people based on outcomes they couldn't control. We lionize entrepreneurs whose timing happened to be right. We condemn parents whose children happen to make terrible choices. We build entire legal systems that punish people more severely when their reckless action happens to kill someone than when it happens not to. In 1976, Thomas Nagel published a paper called Moral Luck as a reply to Bernard Williams' paper of the same name, both appearing in the Aristotelian Society supplementary volume. Together, these papers made philosophers deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't presenting a solution, he was showing that our most basic moral intuitions contradict each other, and there might be no way out. If you have ever felt that pang of moral vertigo when you realize you could easily have been in someone else's position, facing the same temptations, making the same mistakes, if you have ever wondered whether you deserve credit for virtues that are partly accidents of your upbringing, this episode is for you. Because what Nagel discovered is that when we say someone is a good person or a bad person, we are not just evaluating what they control, we are evaluating what happened to them, and we can't seem to stop. The core rule of three. Let's start with the first idea. What is moral luck? Moral luck is the phenomena where we judge people morally for things that are beyond their control. That sentence should be impossible. The entire architecture of moral thinking in Western philosophy rests on something called the control principle. You're only morally responsible for what you can control. Kant made this explicit when he said, the only thing good without qualification is a good will, your intention, your character, the part of you that makes choices. Everything else, your talents, your circumstances, the consequences of your actions is morally irrelevant because it's not fully up to you. But Nagel noticed something. We don't actually believe this. Consider Nagel's actual example. Two people who both drive negligently. Perhaps both failed to check their brakes recently. Both made the same careless choice. One drives without incident. The other's car fails to brake when the child runs into the path and the child dies. According to the control principle, these two people are morally identical. They had the same character flaw, made the same bad decision, took the same risk. The fact that one hit someone is just bad luck. a matter of whether a pedestrian happened to be crossing at that moment. But that's not how we respond. We don't just think the second person was unlucky. We think they're worse. We call them a killer. They carry a different moral weight, a different guilt. The law certainly treats them differently. This is what Nagel called resultant moral luck, when the moral quality of your action depends on how things turn out, on factors beyond your control. Here's the thought experiment that makes it visceral. Imagine you're the person who made it home. You feel relief, maybe some residual shame. Now imagine you're the person who killed someone. You feel horror, crushing guilt, a sense that you're now a different kind of person. Your entire moral identity has changed. But what changed wasn't you. What changed was what the world happened to do with your action. The paradox. We need the control principle to make sense of moral responsibility at all. But we can't help judging people for things beyond their control. And Nagel's devastating insight was that both of these impulses might be necessary to moral thought. This brings me to the second point, the 4 types of moral luck. Nagel didn't just identify one kind of moral luck. He found it everywhere, woven into the fabric of how we think about morality. He identified 4 distinct types, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. First, resultant luck. We have already discussed this. Luck in how things turn out. The person whose email gets sent just as the recipient is in a good mood versus a bad mood. The reformer whose movement happens to catch fire versus the one whose identical movement fizzles. The gambler who happens to win versus the one who happens to lose, even when both made the same irrational bet. Second, circumstantial luck. This is luck in the situations you face. Some people live through wars and genocides. Others live through peace. Some face extreme poverty and the moral pressures it creates. Others never have to steal to eat. Nagel asks us to consider ordinary citizens of Nazi Germany. They had an opportunity to behave heroically by opposing the regime. Most failed this test and are morally culpable for it. But citizens of other countries, say Argentina, were simply not subjected to this test. Even if they would have behaved just as badly in similar circumstances, they didn't face those circumstances, and so they are not similarly culpable. You might be a good person partly because you've never been severely tested. That's circumstantial luck. Third, constitutive luck. This is luck in the kind of person you are, your temperament, your inclinations, your character itself. You didn't choose your genetic predispositions. You didn't choose your early childhood environment that shaped your personality. You didn't choose whether you'd have an anxious temperament or a calm one, whether you'd struggle with anger or empathy would come naturally. Kant wanted to locate moral worth entirely in the will, in your character. But Nagel points out that your character itself is partly a matter of luck. The person who finds it easy to be honest because they are not very tempted to lie, are they more virtuous than someone who struggles constantly against a powerful impulse to deceive? Fourth, causal luck. This is luck in how you are determined by antecedent circumstances, causes that precede your action. If you take determinism seriously, the idea that every event, including your choices, is caused by prior events, then everything about you traces back to causes before you existed. You are the product of a causal change you didn't initiate and can't escape. This one threatens to dissolve the entire notion of moral responsibility. If you couldn't have been different because you're the product of causes beyond your control, how can we hold you responsible for anything? Here's how these work together. Imagine someone who grows up in a peaceful, loving home, circumstantial luck, develops a naturally empathetic temperament, constitutive luck, faces a moral choice and makes the right decision, causal luck, and that decision happens to have good consequences, resultant luck. At every stage, luck is operating, and at every stage, we are making moral judgments as if the person controlled everything. Nagel's point isn't that we should stop making these judgments. His point is darker. We might not be able to. Moral evaluation might require that we judge people for things beyond their control. The alternative might be that we have no one left to judge. The self dissolves into mere events. And here's where most people go wrong. When people first encounter Nagel's argument, they try to solve it. They think, okay, he's shown us the problem. Now we just need to fix our moral thinking. We'll be more careful. We'll only judge people for what they truly control. This is the trap. Because Nagel's argument isn't a problem with a solution. It's a demonstration that moral thought itself might be internally contradictory. The most common mistake is to think we can retreat to pure intention. I'll only judge people for their character and will, not for circumstances or outcomes. This is the Kantian solution. And it sounds noble. But Nagel shows why it fails. First, you can't separate intention from circumstance. Your intentions are shaped by the situations you face. The person who never intended to commit a terrible act might simply be someone who never faced circumstances that would generate that intention. Second, we can't actually access pure intention. We infer someone's character from their actions and the circumstances that produce those actions. Strip away circumstance and outcome, and you have nothing left to evaluate. You can't judge a will in pure isolation from the world. Third, and most importantly, morality is fundamentally about how we act in the world, not just about internal states. A morality that only judges intentions but not actions and consequences is a morality that has lost contact with why we care about morality in the first place. We care because actions affect people, because the world matters, because consequences are real. But here's the trap within the trap. If we embrace moral luck, we seem to abandon the control principle. And without the control principle, moral responsibility starts to look absurd. If I can be morally judged for things beyond my control, then what am I actually responsible for? The answer threatens to be nothing really. You're just fortunate or unfortunate. Some philosophers have tried to bite this bullet. They say, yes, moral responsibility is an illusion. We should abandon reactive attitudes like praise, blame, resentment, and gratitude. We should adopt a purely objective attitude toward human behavior, treating people like we treat natural phenomena, trying to understand and manage them, but not morally judging them. Nagel thinks this is impossible. Not because it's wrong, but because we can't actually live this way. Moral thought isn't optional. It's woven into our emotional responses, our relationships, our sense of meaning. Try spending a day treating everyone, including yourself, as if no one is morally responsible for anything. You will find you can't do it. You can say it, you can't embody it. The real trap is thinking there's a coherent position to occupy. Nagel's arguments suggest that moral thought rests on two incompatible principles. The control principle, you're only responsible for what you control, and the fact that we constantly and necessarily judge people for what they don't control. We need both. We can't have both, and we can't give up either. This is what philosophers call an antinomy, a conflict between two principles that both seem necessary and both seem true, but that contradict each other. And Nagel's suggestion is that moral luck reveals a fundamental antinomy at the heart of moral thought itself, one that parallels the problem of skepticism in epistemology, where similar tensions about control threaten to undermine knowledge. At this point, a reasonable question is, so what? If this is an unsolvable paradox, if we can't change how we think anyway, why does it matter? Here's why it matters. Understanding moral luck changes how you experience moral judgment, both of yourself and others. It introduces a kind of necessary humility, not the false humility that says we're all equally flawed or no one can touch anyone. That's just another way of avoiding moral thought. But a genuine humility that recognizes the line between you and someone you condemn might be thinner than you think. You might be one piece of bad luck away from being in their position, and they might be one piece of good luck away from being in yours. This doesn't mean all moral judgments are wrong. Nagel isn't arguing for moral relativism. He's arguing that moral judgments are unavoidable and compromised. They are real, but they are not as secure as we pretend. When you judge yourself, this matters too. That guilt you carry about something that went wrong. Some of it might be guilt for bad luck, not bad character, and that pride you take in your achievements. Some of it might be pride in good luck, not virtue. The question isn't whether to make moral judgments, it's whether to make them with the kind of certainty and harshness we typically bring to them. Let me bring this together. First, moral luck is the phenomena where we judge people for things beyond their control, which contradicts the control principle that says we are only responsible for what we control. Second, Nagel identified 4 types of moral luck: resultant, circumstantial, constitutive, and causal, showing that luck operates at every level of moral evaluation, from outcomes to character itself. Third, the trap is thinking we can solve this by retreating to pure intention or pure outcome. Both moves fail. Moral thought seems to require holding together 2 incompatible principles, and we might not be able to escape this tension. Over the next 24 hours, notice when you make a moral judgment about someone in the news, about someone in your life, about yourself, and ask, how much of what I am judging was within their control? How much was luck? You won't stop judging, but you might judge differently, with more awareness of how fragile the distinction really is. Nagel ends his essay with a stunning admission. I have no solution to offer to the problem of moral luck. This is rare in philosophy, to name a problem and to say clearly, I don't know how to fix this. I'm not sure it can be fixed. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some ideas aren't meant to resolve our confusion. Maybe they're meant to make us more honest about the confusion we're already in. We live in a world where character and circumstance are entangled, where the moral difference between people might come down to accidents neither chose. We can't think our way out of that, but we can stop pretending we are not in it. If this idea stayed with you, sit with it. Notice where it shows up. We'll continue exploring the edges of what we think we know next time.